Jonathan Hayes dropped his phone the moment he saw the 3 empty wheelchairs. The device hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, but he barely heard it. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the security footage playing across the giant monitor in his home office. For a few seconds, he forgot how to breathe. 3 wheelchairs. Empty. For most parents, that wouldn't mean much. But for Jonathan, it was impossible. His triplet sons, Ethan, Noah, and Liam, hadn't moved on their own in 3 years. 3 long years of hospitals. 3 years of specialists. 3 years of therapies that cost more than most families would earn in a lifetime. 3 years of hearing the same words over and over again. Permanent. Severe. Unlikely. Accepted. Jonathan had accepted many things in life. He had accepted 18-hour workdays while building Hayes Global Technologies into a billion-dollar empire. He had accepted pressure, competition, and sacrifice. But he had never accepted losing his wife. And he had never accepted the idea that his boys would spend the rest of their lives trapped inside bodies that refused to cooperate. Yet that was exactly where life had left him. Alone in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. A place filled with luxury, silence, and grief. The security video continued playing. Jonathan slowly bent down and picked up his phone with trembling hands. Maybe he was looking at the wrong room. Maybe one of the nurses had moved the wheelchairs. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But deep down, he already knew there wasn't. Because something else in the footage was even stranger. Angela Brooks was kneeling on the floor. The new maid. The woman he had hired barely 6 weeks earlier. She wasn't calling for medical help. She wasn't searching the room in panic. She wasn't even looking frightened. She was crying. Yet somehow, she was smiling at the same time. Jonathan stared at the screen. Why? What was she looking at? The camera angle couldn't show the entire room. A large bookshelf blocked part of the view. Jonathan leaned closer. His pulse hammered inside his ears. Then he saw it. A small shadow moving behind Angela. His heart nearly stopped. The figure disappeared before the camera could fully capture it. Jonathan immediately rewound the footage. Once, twice, 3 times. Every replay revealed the same thing. A movement where no movement should exist. A shape where no shape should be. He felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Downstairs, the mansion was silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily through the darkness. Somewhere outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. But inside Jonathan's mind, everything was chaos. Because for the first time in 3 years, impossible no longer felt impossible. And yet another question haunted him even more. Why had Angela never told him? He trusted doctors. He trusted data. He trusted facts. But what if the woman cleaning his house had seen something every expert had missed? Jonathan pressed play one more time. The footage continued. Angela slowly turned her head toward the far wall, toward a place where nobody was standing. Then she whispered something the camera microphone couldn't fully capture. And the moment she spoke those words, 3 small figures began moving toward her from the darkness. But who were they really moving toward? Angela Brooks? Or someone else they believed was still in that room? Jonathan did not sleep that night. Long after the security footage ended, he remained alone in his office, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the mansion that overlooked 20 acres of perfectly manicured Connecticut countryside. The estate was beautiful, the kind of place people dreamed about. Stone walls, private gardens, a lake reflecting the moonlight. But for years, beauty had meant nothing to him. Because inside that mansion lived 3 little boys who had slowly disappeared from the world. Ethan, Noah, and Liam had once been bright, curious children. Jonathan remembered the sound of their laughter echoing through the hallways. He remembered tiny footsteps racing across polished floors. He remembered Claire sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by toys, laughing as all 3 boys climbed into her lap at once. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Everything changed after Claire died. The official story was simple. A sudden medical complication. An unexpected tragedy. A grieving husband. 3 traumatized children. But grief rarely follows simple rules. Within months, the boys began withdrawing. First came the silence. Then the fear. Then the strange physical symptoms nobody could explain. Specialists arrived from Boston, New York, and Chicago. Neurologists, therapists, rehabilitation experts. Each one carried new tests and new theories. Yet every year the boys seemed to retreat further. Eventually the wheelchairs arrived. Then came the diagnosis everyone accepted: a severe neurological condition, permanent impairment, limited hope for recovery. Jonathan spent millions chasing solutions. Nothing changed. At least that was what he believed. As dawn approached, another thought began troubling him. Angela Brooks had only been working in the house for 6 weeks. How could she have seen something dozens of professionals missed over 3 years? The question followed him downstairs the next morning. The mansion was already awake. Staff moved quietly through the halls. Margaret Wilson supervised breakfast preparations. Thomas Bennett reviewed the day's schedule. Everything looked normal. Yet Jonathan noticed something he had never paid attention to before. Angela was not serving breakfast. She was sitting beside the boys. Not speaking, not instructing, simply sitting with them. The scene seemed ordinary until Jonathan realized something else. The boys appeared calmer when she was near. Their faces softened. Their breathing slowed. Even Liam, who usually stared blankly at the floor, seemed focused on her presence. Jonathan watched from across the room without interrupting. Then Angela quietly said Claire's name. Ethan's eyes immediately lifted. Jonathan froze. It happened so quickly, he almost convinced himself he imagined it. A coincidence. A random movement. Yet moments later, Angela spoke the name again. Ethan reacted again. This time Noah's fingers twitched as well. A cold sensation moved through Jonathan's chest. 3 years. 3 years of appointments, evaluations, and reports. Had anyone ever tested that? Had anyone noticed? Or had everyone become so focused on what was wrong with the boys that they stopped paying attention to who they were? Later that afternoon, Jonathan pulled out old medical files and treatment records. Hundreds of pages filled with charts, measurements, and observations. He searched for any mention of emotional triggers, family memories, their mother. There was almost nothing. Then he discovered something even stranger. In one report written shortly before Claire's death, a section had been removed. Several pages were missing entirely. Jonathan stared at the gap in the file for a long time. Because for the first time, he was no longer asking what happened to his sons. He was asking who wanted part of the story to disappear. The missing pages refused to leave Jonathan's mind. For the next several days, he found himself searching for answers in places he had ignored for years. Not because he lacked intelligence. Jonathan Hayes had built one of the most successful technology companies in America. He knew how to find patterns. He knew how to solve problems. But this was different. This was personal. And personal pain had a way of blinding even the smartest people. The first clue appeared where nobody expected it. Thomas Bennett, the family butler, had been organizing storage boxes in the lower-level archive room when he discovered several old home videos. The recordings dated back to the year before Claire died. Jonathan almost ignored them. He had spent years avoiding reminders of happier times. But something made him sit down and watch. At first, the footage showed ordinary family moments. Birthday parties, family dinners, summer afternoons near the lake. Then Jonathan noticed something unusual. Ethan, Noah, and Liam were communicating with one another in ways adults rarely noticed. Small glances, tiny hand movements, repeated patterns. They seemed to understand each other without speaking. The behavior appeared in video after video. Yet none of the medical reports mentioned it. Jonathan watched for hours. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that the boys had always shared a unique connection. Then another detail emerged. Claire seemed aware of it. Several times. She responded to gestures before the boys made a sound. It was almost as if she understood a language no one else could see. That evening, Jonathan showed part of the footage to Angela. She remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. She told him she had noticed something similar during the past few weeks. Each boy displayed a different signal when experiencing strong emotions. Ethan tapped his thumb against his palm. Noah blinked twice in quick succession. Liam shifted his gaze toward specific objects in the room. Separately, the behaviors seemed meaningless. Together, they formed a pattern. Jonathan felt a chill move through him. Because Angela was describing communication. Not random neurological symptoms. Communication. The following morning, another strange discovery surfaced. Margaret Wilson was cleaning one of the guest rooms when she found an old notebook hidden inside a dresser drawer. The notebook belonged to Claire. Most pages contained ordinary observations about motherhood, feeding schedules, family memories, small notes about daily life. Then Jonathan reached a section that stopped him cold. Claire had documented dozens of unusual interactions between the boys. She repeatedly described moments when one child reacted before an event occurred to another. At first she believed it was coincidence. Later she was not so sure. One entry stood out above all the others. Claire wrote that she feared doctors were focusing on the wrong problem. She believed the boys were not losing abilities. She believed they were withdrawing after something frightened them. Unfortunately, the entry ended abruptly. Several pages had been torn out. Jonathan stared at the damaged notebook. The missing medical records. The missing journal pages. The overlooked signals. None of it felt accidental anymore. That night, he walked past the boys' room and paused outside the doorway. Angela was reading softly beside their beds. Ethan suddenly looked toward the window. Seconds later, Noah did the same. Then Liam followed. All three boys were staring into the darkness outside. Jonathan looked through the glass, expecting to see nothing. Instead, he noticed a faint light moving near. The old greenhouse at the edge of the property. A greenhouse that had been locked since Claire died. And somehow, all three boys were watching it, as if they knew exactly what was waiting there. The next morning, Angela found Liam awake before sunrise. The rest of the house still slept beneath a blanket of silence, but Liam's eyes were open, fixed on the pale blue light filtering through the curtains. She quietly pulled a chair beside him and sat down. She did not ask questions. She had learned that the boys rarely responded to pressure. Instead, she simply stayed. For several minutes, neither of them moved. Then Angela began talking softly about her younger brother, Marcus. It was a story she had never shared with anyone in the Hayes family. Marcus had been born with physical challenges of his own. Growing up, doctors often spoke about him as though he could not understand, as though he were not fully present. But Angela knew better. She remembered the way he listened, the way he smiled when people treated him like a person instead of a diagnosis. She remembered how lonely he looked whenever adults talked around him instead of to him. Her voice became quieter as she spoke. There were still parts of that loss she carried every day, parts that never completely healed. As she shared those memories, something unexpected happened. Liam's eyes slowly shifted toward her. It was not a dramatic movement. Most people would have missed it, but Angela noticed. For the first time, he was not looking through her. He was looking at her. A few hours later, Ethan and Noah joined them in the sunroom. The space overlooked the eastern gardens and had once been Claire's favorite room. Angela brought old family photographs she had discovered in storage with Jonathan's permission. One by one, she placed them on a small table. Most produced little reaction. Then she found a photograph taken during a summer picnic years earlier. Claire sat on a blanket beneath an oak tree while all three boys leaned against her. The moment Ethan saw the picture, his hand tightened. Noah blinked rapidly. Liam's eyes filled with tears. Angela felt her chest tighten. These were not random responses. They were memories. Real memories. Living memories. The boys were still carrying their mother with them. Later that afternoon, Jonathan watched from the doorway as Angela continued working with them. There was no special equipment. No expensive therapy program. No groundbreaking treatment. Just patience. Presence. Human connection. And somehow it was accomplishing something years of clinical intervention had not. For the first time, Jonathan felt both hope and guilt at the same time. Hope because he could see changes happening. Guilt because he realized how many moments he had missed while trying to solve everything through experts, schedules, and reports. Yet another surprise waited that evening. While organizing the photographs, Angela discovered one picture had writing on the back. The handwriting belonged to Claire. The message was short. Just one sentence. If they ever become quiet, follow what they are trying to show you. Angela read the words several times. The message felt important, almost like a warning. When Jonathan saw it, he immediately searched the date. The photograph had been taken only 3 weeks before Claire died. Neither of them knew what the sentence meant, but both sensed Claire had been trying to leave something behind. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Angela returned to the boys' room to check on them. She paused at the doorway. All 3 boys were asleep. Yet beside Liam's bed, resting on the floor where it had not been earlier, sat a small wooden toy bird. Angela recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Claire. The toy had been stored inside a locked cabinet for years. Nobody could explain how it got there. And attached to it was a tiny folded note written in faded blue ink. The note contained only 3 words. The greenhouse remembers everything. The note changed everything. Not because it explained anything, but because it proved one thing beyond doubt. Claire had been leaving messages. Carefully. Intentionally. as if she knew that one day someone would need to follow a trail she could not finish herself. The following afternoon, Jonathan unlocked the greenhouse for the first time in years. The old structure sat nearly 200 yards behind the mansion, hidden beyond a row of maple trees. Nature had slowly reclaimed parts of it. Vines climbed the glass walls. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the stone path. The place felt frozen in time. Angela entered first. Jonathan followed close behind. The air smelled faintly of soil, cedar, and memories. Everywhere they looked, traces of Claire remained. Gardening gloves hung from an old hook. Handwritten plant labels still marked empty beds. A weathered rocking chair sat near the far corner where she used to spend quiet afternoons. For a moment, Jonathan could almost imagine her there. Then Angela noticed something unusual. Along one wall stood a row of wooden planters. Most appeared untouched, but one planter had fresh soil, fresh enough that it could not have been sitting there for years. Jonathan knelt beside it. Hidden beneath the surface was a small metal box. His pulse quickened. Inside they found dozens of photographs. Not family portraits. Observation photographs. Claire had taken hundreds of pictures of the boys over time. On the back of each image, she had written notes. Detailed notes. Emotional notes. Patterns. Behaviors. Connections. One photograph showed Ethan smiling while Noah and Liam looked toward the same distant point. Claire wrote, "They always know before I speak." Another image showed the boys sitting quietly beside one another. Her note read, "Not withdrawing. Waiting." Angela carefully turned each photograph over. The deeper they searched, the more obvious it became that Claire had been documenting something nobody else understood. Then they found the final photograph. Jonathan's hands shook as he read the message. If I am right, they are protecting each other. Neither of them fully understood what it meant. Yet something inside Jonathan shifted. For years, he had viewed his sons through the lens of limitations. Medical reports, prognosis, diagnoses. But Claire had viewed them differently. She saw intention where others saw symptoms. She saw communication where others saw silence. Later that evening, another unexpected breakthrough arrived. Angela was helping the boys with dinner when Noah suddenly reached for a spoon on his own. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. Small, fragile, easy to dismiss. Yet everyone in the room saw it. Margaret covered her mouth. Thomas stopped moving entirely. Jonathan felt tears sting his eyes. Nobody celebrated. Nobody wanted to scare away hope. But the atmosphere changed. For the first time in years, possibility entered the room. Yet hope brought a new problem. The next morning, Dr. Victor Lang arrived for a routine evaluation. Jonathan eagerly shared what had been happening. The photographs, the responses, the small movements, the emotional changes. But the doctor's reaction was not what he expected. Victor's expression darkened. He dismissed the discoveries almost immediately. Coincidence, emotional projection, wishful thinking. He warned Jonathan not to abandon established treatment protocols. His tone grew increasingly firm when Angela's observations entered the conversation. Something about her involvement seemed to irritate him. As the meeting ended, Victor quietly requested access to all of Claire's materials. The request sounded reasonable. Yet Angela noticed something unsettling. The moment Victor saw the final photograph, all color drained from his face. And for a brief second, before he hid it, he looked frightened. For several days after Dr. Victor Lang's visit, tension settled over the Hayes estate like a storm cloud that refused to move. The hope that had begun quietly growing inside the house now faced its first real challenge. Jonathan found himself pulled in 2 directions. One part of him wanted to believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. The small changes, the moments of connection, the signs that his sons were still reaching for the world. But another part of him feared being wrong. Fear had ruled his life ever since Claire died. Hope felt dangerous because hope could break your heart all over again. Victor continued calling almost daily. Each conversation carried the same warning. He insisted that emotional interpretations were distracting everyone from proper medical care. He urged Jonathan to stop encouraging what he called unrealistic expectations. At first, Jonathan listened politely. Then he began noticing something strange. Every time Claire's notes were mentioned, Victor immediately changed the subject. Every time Angela described a new observation, he dismissed it before hearing the details. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Angela faced pressure of her own. Several staff members had started quietly questioning her influence. not because they disliked her. Quite the opposite. Many of them had witnessed changes in the boys firsthand. But fear made people cautious. What if everyone was seeing what they wanted to see? What if hope was creating illusions? Angela understood their concerns. Yet something deep inside her told her to keep going. One afternoon, she made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of keeping the boys inside their usual therapy spaces, she asked Jonathan for permission to take them outside. Not to the gardens. Not to the lake. She wanted to bring them back to the greenhouse. Jonathan hesitated. The place carried too many memories. Too much grief. Yet after a long silence, he agreed. The trip took nearly an hour. The boys had not been near the greenhouse in years. As they approached the old structure, something changed immediately. Ethan's breathing quickened. Noah sat unusually upright. Liam's eyes never left the path ahead. Angela noticed every reaction. Once inside, she guided them toward the center of the room where sunlight poured through the glass ceiling. The space felt different now. Less abandoned. Less sad. Almost as if it had been waiting. Then something happened that nobody expected. Liam slowly raised his hand and pointed toward a corner cabinet. It was not a reflex. It was intentional, clear, deliberate. Jonathan felt his entire body freeze. The gesture lasted only a second, but it changed everything. Because it was the first unmistakable action any of them had witnessed. Angela carefully opened the cabinet. Inside sat several gardening journals, old seed packets, and a wooden music box covered in dust. The moment she lifted the music box, Noah began crying. Not from fear. Not from distress. The tears seemed connected to recognition. Memory. Angela gently wound the mechanism. A soft melody filled the greenhouse. Jonathan had not heard that tune in years. Claire used to play it every night before the boys went to sleep. Suddenly, Ethan squeezed the armrest of his wheelchair. Noah reached toward the sound. Liam closed his eyes. The emotional impact was overwhelming. Yet before anyone could process what was happening, another voice interrupted the moment. Dr. Victor Lang stood in the doorway. Nobody knew he was coming. His expression was harder than Jonathan had ever seen. He immediately demanded that the session end. He insisted the boys were being manipulated emotionally. The confrontation that followed left the greenhouse silent. Then Victor said something that changed the entire direction of the story. Looking directly at Jonathan, he quietly warned, "If Claire's journals are still hidden somewhere on this property, there are things inside them that should never be found." Victor's warning echoed through Jonathan's mind long after everyone left the greenhouse. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he had said it. Not concern, not caution, fear, real fear. For the first time, Jonathan began questioning someone he had trusted for years. Yet doubt alone was not enough to erase 3 years of medical advice. The conflict tore at him from both sides. That night he sat alone in his study reviewing contracts he could not focus on and reports he could not absorb. Every path seemed dangerous. If Angela was wrong, he could risk hurting his sons by abandoning established treatment. If Angela was right, he had already lost 3 years following the wrong path. The weight of that possibility felt unbearable. While Jonathan struggled with uncertainty, the atmosphere around the boys changed dramatically. The breakthrough at the greenhouse had awakened something. Ethan became more alert. Noah followed conversations with his eyes. Liam seemed especially restless. Yet with every sign of progress came greater emotional vulnerability. They were no longer retreating into silence. They were reacting, feeling, remembering. And memory can be painful. 2 days later, the situation reached a breaking point. Jonathan returned from an important meeting to find the house in chaos. Nurses were moving quickly through the hallways. Staff members whispered anxiously. The moment he saw Margaret's face, his stomach dropped. Liam had suffered a severe emotional episode earlier that afternoon. He had become distressed after hearing a familiar melody from another room. Not physically injured, not medically endangered, but overwhelmed. The emotional walls that had protected him for years seemed to be collapsing. Jonathan rushed upstairs. Angela sat quietly beside Liam's bed. Her eyes were red. She looked exhausted. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she seemed unsure of herself. Jonathan demanded answers. What happened? Why was Liam struggling? Could all of this be moving too fast? Angela tried to explain that healing often brings hidden pain to the surface before recovery begins. But Jonathan barely heard her. Fear was speaking louder than reason. Every nightmare he had carried for years suddenly returned at once. The possibility of failure, the possibility of making things worse, the possibility of losing what little stability remained. Then Victor arrived, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. Calm, confident, certain. He immediately blamed the recent changes, the greenhouse visits, the emotional triggers, Claire's belongings, Angela's methods. He insisted everything had gone too far. Jonathan listened. Exhausted parents often do. Fear makes certainty sound comforting. By the end of the conversation, he made the decision he would later regret more than almost any other. He suspended all of Angela's activities with the boys. No more greenhouse visits. No more journals. No more memory exercises. No more unsupervised time. Angela stood silently as he delivered the news. She did not argue. That somehow hurt even more. She simply nodded and accepted the decision. But something happened the following morning that nobody expected. Ethan refused breakfast. Noah would not respond to anyone. Liam turned his face toward the wall and would not look at another person all day. The progress that had taken weeks to build seemed to vanish overnight. The mansion felt colder than ever. Even Jonathan could sense it. Yet the worst moment came late that evening. As Angela quietly packed a small bag, preparing to leave if necessary, Thomas Bennett approached her carrying an envelope he had discovered hidden inside the base of the greenhouse music box. The envelope was addressed in Claire's handwriting. Not to Jonathan, not to the doctors, not to the staff. It contained only one name, Angela Brooks. The impossible part was that Claire had died years before Angela had ever stepped foot inside the Hayes estate. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Angela simply stared at the envelope resting in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Claire's. Elegant, careful, personal. Yet the impossible question remained. How could a woman who had never met Angela have written her name years before? Jonathan stood nearby, equally stunned. The answer should not have existed. And yet there it was. Slowly, Angela opened the envelope. Inside she found several folded pages and a single photograph. The photograph showed Claire standing beside a woman neither Angela nor Jonathan recognized. On the back, Claire had written a date from nearly 9 years earlier. Beneath it was a short note. The woman who taught me how to listen. Angela unfolded the first page. What followed felt less like a letter and more like a confession. Claire described a conference she attended years before the boys became ill. There she met a child advocate who specialized in helping families communicate with children who had been misunderstood by medical systems. Claire wrote that the experience changed the way she viewed human connection forever. She learned that silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes silence is a language waiting to be understood. Jonathan listened as Angela read. Every word seemed aimed directly at the blind spots he had spent years carrying. Claire continued describing her growing concerns during the months before her death. She believed the boys were not deteriorating in the way doctors claimed. She suspected they were responding to emotional trauma in ways nobody fully understood. Most importantly, she repeatedly mentioned resistance from someone inside the medical team. Someone who dismissed every observation that could not be measured by a machine. Jonathan immediately thought of Victor. But the next page revealed something even more surprising. Claire never named him. Instead, she referred to a confidential report she had commissioned independently. A second opinion she had kept hidden. According to her notes, several specialists disagreed with the primary diagnosis and recommended a completely different approach focused on emotional regulation, family connection, and environmental triggers. Jonathan felt physically ill. He had never seen the report. Nobody had ever told him it existed. As the realization settled in, dozens of scattered clues suddenly began connecting. The missing medical pages, the altered records, the emotional responses, the warnings, the fear Victor displayed whenever Claire's work resurfaced. Yet the most painful discovery was still ahead. Tucked inside the final page was a brief handwritten paragraph addressed directly to Jonathan. Claire wrote that if he was reading these words, it meant she had failed to convince him while she was alive. She apologized for that. Then she wrote a sentence that shattered him completely. You will try to save them the way you save everything else. With control. But our boys do not need control. They need to feel safe enough to come back. Jonathan lowered his head and cried for the first time in years. Not quiet tears. Not restrained grief. The kind of grief that comes when a painful truth finally breaks through every wall you have built around yourself. He realized he had spent years fighting symptoms while ignoring wounds he could not see. Yet even as the truth began emerging, one final discovery changed everything again. Hidden inside the envelope was a small key taped beneath the last page. Alongside it was a handwritten instruction from Claire. Only 6 words. The answer is beneath the greenhouse. The key looked ordinary. Small. Brass. Worn by time. Yet everyone in the room understood that nothing about it was ordinary anymore. Claire had spent years leaving pieces of a puzzle behind, and somehow every piece had survived long enough to be found. The next morning, Jonathan, Angela, Thomas, and Margaret returned to the greenhouse. A steady rain fell across the property as they searched for anything hidden beneath the old structure. Hours passed without success. Then Thomas noticed something unusual beneath the floorboards near the center planter. One board sounded hollow. Beneath it, they discovered a narrow compartment built into the foundation itself. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside sat a weatherproof storage case. Jonathan opened it with shaking hands. What they found changed the entire story. The case contained recordings, audio journals, dozens of them. Claire had documented her observations over many months. As they listened, her voice filled the greenhouse once again. Calm, loving, determined. She spoke about the boys in ways nobody else ever had. She described their fears, their sensitivities, their emotional bonds. Most importantly, she documented a gradual change that began shortly after a traumatic medical evaluation years earlier. According to Claire, the boys became frightened after a series of procedures and assessments they did not understand. She believed they started withdrawing not because they were losing abilities, but because they no longer felt safe. Then came the revelation none of them expected. Claire had secretly consulted independent specialists across the country. Several experts reached remarkably similar conclusions. The boys showed signs of emotional shutdown rather than irreversible neurological decline. The recordings contained reports, recommendations, and correspondence supporting her concerns. Jonathan sat frozen as he listened. The evidence was overwhelming. Not speculation. Not hope. Evidence. He realized Claire had spent her final months fighting a battle he never knew existed. A battle she had been losing alone. The guilt nearly crushed him. Yet one recording affected him more than all the others combined. Near the end of the archive, Claire spoke directly into the recorder after one particularly emotional day. Her voice trembled slightly. She said that if Jonathan was hearing this, she wanted him to understand something. The boys had never stopped reaching for him. They simply stopped. Believing he could hear them, Jonathan lowered his head and covered his face. For years he thought he had been protecting his sons through treatments, specialists, and structure. Now he saw the painful truth. He had become so focused on fixing them that he stopped seeing them. Meanwhile, another discovery emerged. Hidden among the recordings was correspondence involving Dr. Victor Lang. Years earlier, he had reviewed some of the same alternative findings Claire received. Yet his written responses consistently dismissed them. More troubling still, several recommendations never appeared in the official treatment records. The missing pages suddenly made sense. Claire had been right all along. By late afternoon, Jonathan finally made a decision. For the first time in years, he chose trust over control. He publicly restored Angela's full role in the boys' care and apologized for doubting her. The change was immediate. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because something inside the family shifted. Hope returned. Yet that hope would soon face its greatest test. As evening settled over the estate, Angela entered the boys' room, carrying one of Claire's recordings. She softly played a short message from their mother. For several moments, nothing happened. Then Ethan slowly turned his head. Noah reached for his brother's hand. Liam looked directly at Jonathan, and in a voice barely above a whisper, after years of silence, he spoke a single word. Dad. The room became perfectly still. One word. 3 letters. Yet for Jonathan Hayes, it felt louder than anything he had heard in years. Dad. Liam's voice was weak and fragile, almost swallowed by the silence around it. But it was real. Jonathan fell to his knees beside his son. Tears streamed down his face as he gently took Liam's hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The years of distance, fear, grief, and misunderstanding seemed to collapse into that single moment. Across the room, Ethan and Noah watched quietly. Something had changed, not only in them, but in their father as well. In the weeks that followed, The final pieces of the truth came together. Independent reviews of Claire's hidden records confirmed what she had suspected all along. The boys had never lost the capacity to connect with the world. They had retreated from it after emotional trauma, grief, confusion, and years of being treated as problems to solve rather than children to understand. Their silence had been protection. Their withdrawal had been fear. The missing reports and discarded recommendations had delayed the support they truly needed. Dr. Victor Lang eventually admitted that he had dismissed alternative findings because he believed his approach was the only correct one. Pride had blinded him. The truth was painful, but it finally allowed everyone to move forward. Yet the greatest transformation did not happen in a doctor's office or through a medical report. It happened inside the walls of a home that slowly came back to life. Jonathan stopped measuring progress through charts and evaluations. He began spending mornings with his sons. He read stories, shared meals, walked beside them through every small victory. Some days brought breakthroughs. Some days brought setbacks. But for the first time, they faced those days together. The greenhouse became a symbol of healing. The place that once held secrets now held laughter. Ethan learned to express his thoughts more openly. Noah gradually became more engaged with the people around him. Liam continued finding his voice one word at a time. None of it happened overnight. Real healing rarely does. But every step mattered. Through it all, one person remained at the center of the family's recovery. Angela Brooks never asked for recognition. She never demanded credit. She simply continued showing up with patience, kindness, and faith when everyone else had almost given up. One afternoon, Jonathan gathered the household staff in the greenhouse. Standing beneath the sunlight that poured through the glass ceiling, he spoke honestly for perhaps the first time in years. He thanked every person who had stayed during the darkest chapter of their lives. Then he turned toward Angela. His voice trembled. He told her she had given his family something money could never buy. She had helped them find each other again. Angela wiped away tears as the boys rolled toward her. Liam reached her first, then Ethan, then Noah. Together they wrapped their arms around her. Nobody in the room could hold back their emotions. Not Margaret, not Thomas, not even Jonathan. Months later, visitors often noticed something different about the Hayes estate. It was not the gardens. It was not the mansion. It was not the wealth. It was the sound. Children's laughter drifted through open windows. Conversations filled hallways that had once been silent. Life had returned. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson Claire had been trying to leave behind all along. Money can build a house. It can hire experts. It can solve countless problems. But it cannot replace presence. It cannot create trust. It cannot heal a wounded heart. Sometimes the thing that saves a family is not power, control, or wealth. Sometimes it is a person who chooses to stay, chooses to listen, and chooses to love when everyone else has stopped believing. And in the end, that was the miracle that changed everything.